listener, a warm invitation from me, Havila Dharmraj, to this series of stories from the book of Judges. Hero stories. Some happy, some sad, some even funny, but each with something to learn from. You may listen to the stories by yourself, or as a family, or as a small group. In these days, a very small group, please. Towards the end of each story, there is a point at which you may pause the podcast and reflect on the story to see what you could take away from it. Then, you can come back to the podcast and listen to one of many possible takeaways. When our story begins, a long time ago, the people of Israel were in trouble. Actually, they were in deep trouble. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and because they did this evil, the Lord gave Eglon, king of Moab, power over Israel. Now, Moab was a country just to the southeast of Israel. It was on the other side of the river Jordan, and what has happened when our story begins is that Eglon, king of Moab, has got together a coalition and invaded Israel. Getting the Ammonites and the Amalekites to join him, Eglon came and attacked Israel, and they took possession of the city of Palms. The city of Palms is another name for Jericho, a city that you probably know better from the New Testament. And here in Jericho, Eglon, king of Moab, made his government. He set up government in Jericho, and from there he subdued the land of Israel. The Israelites were subjected to Eglon, king of Moab, for 18 years. And again the Israelites cried out to the Lord, and he gave them a deliverer. It must have been a terrible 18 years, because Israel was subject to Eglon, which means to say that every year of those 18 years, they paid taxes, what they call tribute. They paid tribute to Eglon. Tribute in these days was mostly in kind. They had to give tribute out of the produce of their fields, the fruit of their orchards, the oil from their olives, the wine from their grapes. So every year, rather than keep these things for themselves and make a living out of it, they had to give tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. And this has been happening for 18 long years. And now as Israel cries out, God gives them a deliverer. Who is this deliverer? The deliverer is Ehud. Ehud, a left-handed man, the son of Gera, the Benjamite. A left-handed man. Now this could mean three different things in those days. A left-handed man could be the kind of person we call a lefty. Someone who from birth prefers their left hand over their right hand. Or perhaps Ehud was crippled in his right hand and therefore had to rely on his left hand. Or, even more exciting, it's possible that Ehud could use both his right and his left hands with equal ease. In these days when people went out to war constantly, soldiers would sometimes train themselves to be ambidextrous, that is, good with both hands, so that when you were out there in the battlefield wielding a sword, and if your right arm got tired, you just switched your sword to the left hand and carried on chopping off people's heads with it. Very convenient, eh? So it's possible that our Ehud was a lefty in any one of these three senses. We don't know. But he is introduced as a left-handed man. Now, detail is very important in the stories of the Old Testament. And we're going to see that this little detail is going to come in very important. The Israelites sent Ehud with tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. Now, for how long we don't know. Perhaps he had been doing this all these long 18 years. But this year, something is different. Now, Ehud had made a double-edged sword about a cubit long which he strapped to his right thigh under his clothing. A double-edged sword. Now, swords in these days came in different shapes and in different sizes. Some could be sickle-shaped, curved like a half-moon, and those would be blunt on one edge and sharp on the inner edge. But here, Ehud has made a double-edged sword. So this is probably a straight sword, like a dagger, and sharp on both edges. And it's a cubit long. A cubit would have been about 18 inches long. And so this would have looked more like a longish dagger. Now this is something that he has strapped to his right thigh under his clothing. Why the right thigh? Because he is a left-handed man. A left-handed man, if he wants to be quick on a draw, needs to have his weapon on the right side of his body. Ehud presented the tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. And Eglon, king of Moab, was a very fat man. Why are we being told this? In these days, kings were warrior kings. They led their people, their armies from up front. They are the ones who led their contingents into the battlefield, into war. Such a king, you would think, a warrior king, would have to be a lean, mean fighting machine. But that's not what Eglon is. Perhaps he was that lean, mean machine at one time, but that was 18 years ago when he and his army crossed the river Jordan and took over Jericho and all of Israel's lands. But now in these 18 years, Eglon has become negligent and he has become fat. Actually, he's become very fat. Do we need to know this? Perhaps. Let's watch and see how the story goes. After Ehud had presented the tribute, he sent on their way those who carried it. But on reaching the stone images near Gilgal, he himself went back to Eglon. Now there is a series of entries and exits in this story. Ehud has come into the throne room of the king with his retinue of tribute bearers. He has presented the tribute. Now he leaves with his men, and then at some point on the journey, he sends the men away while he himself turns around and comes back to the palace. Now later in the story, we are going to hear that this throne room, like any other throne room, has king's attendants. And with the series of exits and entrances, you begin to wonder how Ehud has been managing to come and go without being checked. Aren't guards supposed to check people before they let them into the presence of the king? Of course. But Ehud has managed to come and go undetected. How can this be? Several possible reasons here. Perhaps the guards know Ehud because he has come and gone so many years, and that's why they let him in without even checking him. Or perhaps they've done a lazy check. They've checked on the side of Ehud's body where they think a weapon is going to be concealed. And they are assuming perhaps that Ehud, like most people, is a right-handed man, and so perhaps they check only his left side, and not finding any weapon on him, they let him in. At any rate, we've understood now that security is really, really poor. Something bad is going to happen. And we know that something bad is going to happen for another reason. It's because of the name of the king of Moab. His name is Eglon. Now the meaning of Eglon is a calf. Actually, a fat calf. And now we know what Eglon doesn't know. We know that there is a double-edged 18-inch dagger on the person of Ehud. So here you have a dagger and you have a fat calf, and very clearly at some point in the story the two are going to meet. Will they meet now, when Eglon has received Ehud for the second time into his presence? Ehud comes into the presence of the king now for the second time, and this time he speaks. He says, "Your Majesty, I have a secret message for you." The king said to his attendants, "Leave us." And they all left. Now here's a really foolish king. He, in response to Ehud's words, decides to leave himself all alone with the representative of a people that he's been oppressing for 18 long years. He says to his attendants, "Leave us." And everyone goes. So here is this throne room, this courtroom, with just two people in it, Ehud and Eglon the Moabite. Ehud then approached Eglon while he was sitting alone in the upper room of his palace and said, "I have a message from God for you." Now, when Ehud speaks again, he expands a little bit on the secret message. It's not just a secret message, more importantly, it's a message from God. Now, in these times, everybody respected other people's gods. And so, this Moabite king, on hearing that the God of Israel has a message for him, begins to stand up in respect. The king arose from his seat. Now, in your mind, you have to imagine this king, this particular king, rising from his seat. Remember, we were told that he was a very fat man. Can you imagine a very fat man trying to get up from a chair? His hands go onto the armrests of the chair, and then as he bears his weight on his arms and pushes down, he tries to get up, and his face immediately is looking at the floor in the effort to stand. Eglon has taken his eyes off the enemy. He's hardly a warrior king anymore. He's taken his eyes off the enemy and trying to get up. As the king rose from his seat, Ehud reached with his left hand, drew the sword from his right thigh, and plunged it into the king's belly. Now here I should tell you a little bit about what that throne room might have looked like. We know that in these days, a throne room was a very simple one. It was a longish rectangular hall which had at one end a raised platform with a few steps leading up to it, maybe 2 or 3 steps. And at the head of the steps would have been a simple throne chair in which the king sat. So now you have to imagine that while the king is trying to get up in his chair, here is Ehud somewhere in the middle of the room, and he does a running jump up the steps. And as he runs forward, his left arm, beautifully coordinated, flicks the dagger out of his right thigh, and then Ehud is in a position to plunge that dagger right into the belly of the king. And this running thrust is so forceful that even the handle sank in after the blade, and the king's bowels discharged. Now this is a gross detail, and we wonder if we need to be told it. We know that when people undergo severe and sudden trauma to the body, bowels can discharge. This happens, for example, when a person is hung to death. So as this strike goes deep into the soft parts of the king's body, his bowels discharge. Ehud did not pull the sword out, and the fat closed in over it. Now, how is Ehud going to escape? Then Ehud went out to the porch. He shut the doors of the upper room behind him and locked them. And then he simply disappears out of the story. He goes to the doors of the throne room and shuts the doors from inside the throne room. So what you have is really a locked room murder mystery, because Ehud disappears out of that room. How he does, we don't know. Perhaps there was an exit out of the throne room that he had long before noticed. Maybe he had enough knowledge of the lay of the palace to have figured out already a strategy for escape. So here is no jihadi suicide bomber. Here is someone who has worked out an exit. And after he had gone, the servants came back. Now the servants, having been dismissed, have gone off to have a break. And after a while, they're finding their way back, lazy, negligent servants, and they found the doors of the upper room locked, and they said among themselves, "Oh, the king must be relieving himself in the inner room of the palace." I should tell you here that just behind the king's throne, on this platform, there was usually a little toilet, a privy, a very bare, crude one, more or less a hole in the ground, that the king could use. Now, why do these servants who are on the other side of the locked door think that the king must be using the toilet? Here is where the gross detail comes in. You remember when the blade entered the king's body, his bowels discharged with a shock. The servants waited to the point of embarrassment, but when he did not open the doors of the room, they took a key and unlocked them. And when they came in there, they saw their Lord fallen to the floor, dead. Imagine the sight that greets them as they enter the throne room. The king's body has slipped down those 3 or 4 steps and is lying sprawled on the floor. Perhaps at first glance they can't even make out if he is dead or alive, just fainted. But as they move closer, they can see the bodily discharge. They can perhaps see just the very tip of the handle of the blade that has gone bang into the middle of his belly. And they know that their Lord is dead. They are standing there knowing fully well that the next thing that will happen is that their own heads will roll. They haven't been good guards. While they waited outside that door for the king to open the doors of the throne room, while they waited, Ehud got away. He passed by the stone images and escaped to Seirah. And when he arrived there, he blew a trumpet in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites went down with him from the hills, with him leading them. The plan is much grander, much larger than we had imagined. The plan was not simply for the assassination of an oppressor king. The plan was full-out rebellion. Ehud has already gathered a contingent of men, a small army, and has asked them to wait till they hear the sound of the trumpet. And now as soon as he blows the trumpet, there they are, ready to follow him. "Follow me," he ordered, "for the Lord has given Moab, your enemy, into your hands." And so they followed him down and took possession of the fords of the Jordan that led to Moab. The fords of the Jordan River. A ford is a crossing point on a river. Instead of a bridge or a boat, you can cross at a ford because at this point the water is very shallow. You can almost wade over the river. So what Ehud and his men have done is to go right around the city of Jericho and capture the crossing points of the Jordan, knowing that in their panic, the Moabites who occupy Jericho will first of all try to get back over the Jordan to their home country of Moab. And if they are going to retreat in their panic, they are going to go smack into Israelite soldiers simply waiting for them at the crossing points. The Israelites allowed no one to cross over, and at that time they struck down about 10,000 Moabites, all vigorous and strong. Not one escaped. Vigorous, strong Moabite soldiers, not fat, not very fat like their king, but strong soldiers. Not one of them escaped because Israel had lured them into a trap. And that day Moab was made subject to Israel, and the land had peace for 80 years. When the story comes to its end, the situation is completely reversed. Now at this point, you have the opportunity to pause the audio and go away and think of the takeaway from the story. What is the point of the story. Come back after a couple of minutes and then I'll explain one possible takeaway. Who is the deliverer in the story? We are told that when the Israelites cried out to the Lord, He gave them a deliverer, this Ehud. So who is the deliverer now? Is it Ehud? Or is it God, because He is the one who gave Israel the deliverer? Let's think about this for a bit. Now, right through the story, it's Ehud who is at the forefront of things. Here is a man who has not lost spirit even after 18 years of oppression. Here is a man who uses the minimal resources that are available to him. He uses the fact that he is a left-handed man to do a surprise assassination. He makes himself just enough weaponry to be able to conduct the assassination, an 18-inch dagger, and he makes himself an exit plan so that he can leave the palace unharmed, and he puts together a strategy for the small force of Israelites to yet be successful in routing the Moabites at the fords of the Jordan. Ehud is a resourceful fellow, he is a clever man, and he is a courageous man. Ehud seems to be the hero of the story. But wait a minute. Think about all the places where Ehud's plan could have gone wrong. Think about the weak links in the plan, the holes in the plan. If the guards hadn't been so careless and negligent, they would have caught out Ehud and his weapon even before he got into the throne room. And they had 2 such opportunities to do that. Secondly, the king. The king need not have dismissed his servants. He could have asked Ehud to say what the secret message from God was with his servants around him. These are 2 places that the plan could have gone terribly wrong. But the plan didn't go wrong. It so happened that the servants were negligent and the king was carelessly trusting of Ehud. These are circumstances that only God could have controlled. And this is where God's contribution comes in. He made sure that these 2 holes have gotten plugged. And what is more, there are some other things that happen that weren't at all in Ehud's control. The king arises from his seat. The king arises from his seat, making it so much more easier for Ehud to run up those steps and plunge his dagger straight into the king's belly. And then the dead king discharges his bowels. Now this is something that gives Ehud extra time because the servants end up waiting outside the door to allow the king, supposedly, to relieve himself. So here are 2 other places at which Ehud gets unexpected advantage. What we're trying to say is that both Ehud and God acting together delivered Israel. And here lies our lesson. The lesson being that God acts in cooperation, in collaboration with humans. God could have performed this deliverance all by himself by some miraculous act. But he chose rather to work alongside a human who was smart and resourceful and courageous. And God came alongside him. Sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that God has to do it all while we simply sit and wait, doing nothing. Well, Ehud didn't do nothing. He did quite a bit. Sometimes we make the mistake at the other end of thinking that we should be doing everything and maybe God will in some fuzzy way bless what we're doing. Somewhere in between the 2 extremes lies the truth. We do all we can, knowing that only God can finish the job. It's when we and God are working together that the task gets done. And the task gets done, however difficult it might be, or however impossible it might have seemed. The task still gets done, and that is because human and God work together. Next time, we are going to be looking at the story of Deborah and Barak from Judges chapters 4 and 5. Till then, stay safe, stay well.